Two volunteers enter a laboratory on the same morning. They are of similar ages. They weigh almost the same. They receive meals carefully prepared by the researchers. The amount of calories is practically identical. During the following days, everything is monitored: what they eat, how much they move, how they sleep, and even the composition of their feces, which will reveal information about the trillions of microorganisms that live in the gut. At first glance, it seems like a simple experiment. If both consume practically the same amount of energy, it would be expected that the organism would respond similarly. But that's not what happened. When the researchers analyzed the results, they found something intriguing. Glucose levels after meals were different. The sensation of hunger appeared at different times. Hormones linked to satiety responded in different ways. Even the way each organism used that energy followed unexpected paths. How was this possible? For a long time, we learned that metabolism worked like a relatively simple equation: calories in on one side, calories out on the other. This idea helped explain many aspects of body weight and remains an important part of nutritional science. But it doesn't tell the whole story. In recent decades, researchers have begun to discover that there is an invisible universe influencing every meal we eat. A universe made up of hormones, signals sent by the brain, metabolic adaptations, and, most importantly, trillions of microorganisms that live inside our gut. Together, they participate in processes that help determine how we absorb nutrients, how we regulate appetite, how we respond to food, and even why two people can react completely differently to the same dish. Is metabolism really something fixed? Or is it constantly being reprogrammed by the choices we make every day? This question is changing how science understands food. Throughout this investigation, we will follow some of the most fascinating experiments in modern nutrition. We will discover how the idea of counting calories was born, why it was so important, and what recent discoveries have revealed that the human body is much more complex than we imagined. We will also explore the role of the gut microbiota, understand how the gut communicates with the brain, and discover why small changes in diet can trigger adaptations that accumulate over months and years. At the end of this journey, perhaps the biggest surprise will not be realizing that the body changes. The real surprise will be understanding that it never stops changing. With each meal, each night's sleep, each walk, each repeated habit, the body receives new information about the environment in which it lives, and it responds to it in ways that science has only recently begun to understand. If today we hear about gut microbiota, satiety hormones, and personalized nutrition, it's easy to forget that, for a long time, eating seemed to obey a single rule: calories in, calories out. This idea didn't arise by chance. It was born from one of the most important discoveries in the history of human physiology. In the 19th century, scientists began to realize that the human body functioned in many aspects as an energy transformation system. Just as an engine needs fuel to function, so did the body. But how much, and how to measure it? To answer these questions, researchers built impressive equipment for the time. One of them was the human calorimeter. Imagine a completely sealed room, equipped with instruments capable of measuring the heat produced by a person's body for hours or even days. There, volunteers ate, slept, worked, and performed physical activities while scientists recorded every detail. These experiments revealed something extraordinary. The body transforms food into energy in a measurable way. Proteins, carbohydrates, and fats provide different amounts of energy, which came to be expressed in a unit known to all of us, the calorie. This discovery revolutionized nutrition. For the first time, it was possible to estimate how much a person needed to eat to maintain their vital functions and perform their daily activities. Later, the concept of energy balance emerged. The logic was elegant. If someone consumes more energy than they expend, they tend to store this surplus, mainly in the form of body fat. If they expend more energy than they consume, they tend to use their reserves. This principle remains true. None of the recent discoveries have invalidated the law of conservation of energy. But as time went on, researchers realized there was an even more interesting question. What determines how much energy a person actually expends? The answer seems simple. Basal metabolism, physical activity, digestion, body temperature. But as the studies progressed, results that were difficult to explain began to emerge. Two people of similar age, same weight, same sex, same calorie consumption, yet they presented different metabolic responses. Some felt hungrier, others less so. Some lost weight quickly. Others seemed to reach a plateau, even while maintaining their diet. Initially, many believed that these differences were a consequence of a lack of discipline. Perhaps the participants were not correctly following the guidelines. Perhaps they underestimated the amount of food consumed, and in fact, this can happen in nutritional studies. But it didn't explain all cases. When experiments began to be conducted in highly controlled environments, where each meal was prepared by the researchers and each movement was monitored, the differences continued to appear. This meant that something else was happening. It was then that scientists began to investigate a phenomenon known as metabolic adaptation. Imagine you decide to drastically reduce your calorie intake. In the first few days, your body uses its energy reserves, but the body doesn't interpret this change as a diet. From an evolutionary perspective, it may interpret it as a period of scarcity, and it tries to adapt. Energy expenditure decreases. Some hormones related to appetite increase. Others, linked to satiety, decrease. The body starts to conserve energy whenever possible. This response made sense for almost all of human history. In an environment where food was uncertain, those who could use energy efficiently survived best. Today, however, this same adaptation can make it more difficult to maintain weight loss over time. But metabolic adaptation was only part of the story. Another mystery remained unanswered. Why did different people react differently to the exact same meal? For many years, this variation was mainly attributed to genetics. Undoubtedly, genes exert a significant influence. But as new technologies allowed us to study the body in much greater detail, an unexpected protagonist emerged. An invisible universe that lives inside each of us, the gut. More specifically, the trillions of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other microorganisms that make up the gut microbiota. Until a few decades ago, it was thought that these bacteria only helped with digestion. Today, we know that they participate in much more complex functions. They produce substances that influence metabolism. They interact with the immune system. They communicate with the brain through chemical and nerve signals, and they can help explain why two seemingly similar organisms respond so differently to the same food. This discovery completely changed the direction of nutrition research. The focus shifted from just the quantity of calories to including the quality of food, the composition of the microbiota, hormones, sleep, stress, and the entire network of factors that influence human metabolism. It was the beginning of a new era, an era in which the body ceased to be seen as a simple calorie counting machine and began to be understood as a living, dynamic, and constantly adapting system. And it is precisely in this invisible universe that we will find one of the most fascinating discoveries of modern science. Imagine a city with more inhabitants than the population of the Earth. Now imagine that this city exists inside you. It works tirelessly, 24 hours a day, producing chemical substances, transforming food, sending signals to different organs, and responding quickly to any change in diet. This city exists, and it is located primarily in your gut. Scientists call it the gut microbiota. For a long time, it was believed that these bacteria were merely silent passengers, responsible for aiding in the digestion of certain foods. Today, we know that this view was only a small part of the story. In fact, The microbiota functions as a true ecosystem. Each person harbors trillions of microorganisms belonging to hundreds of different species. They coexist, compete, cooperate, and constantly change. And the most surprising thing is that no two microbiotas are exactly alike. Just as our fingerprints are unique, the composition of these microorganisms also varies from person to person. This difference begins at birth. The type of delivery, breastfeeding, the environment in which we grow up, the medications we use, especially antibiotics, and the foods consumed throughout life help shape this invisible universe. That's why two individuals can respond differently to the same meal. They don't share exactly the same internal ecosystem. But what do these bacteria actually do? The answer surprised researchers. When we consume foods rich in fiber, present in fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans, oats, and whole grains, a large portion of this fiber reaches the large intestine practically intact. We human beings cannot digest them completely, but bacteria can. They ferment these fibers and produce molecules called short-chain fatty acids, such as butyrate, acetate, and propionate. These compounds went unnoticed for years. Today, we know that they participate in extremely important functions. They serve as an energy source for intestinal cells. They contribute to the integrity of the intestinal barrier. They influence inflammatory processes. And they help in communication between the intestine, liver, immune system, and brain. In other words, food doesn't just nourish you. It also feeds the trillions of microorganisms that live inside you. And they respond to this food by producing substances capable of influencing the functioning of the organism. It's a two-way relationship, but there's another, almost invisible aspect. The microbiota changes rapidly. In controlled studies, researchers have observed that significant alterations in the composition of these bacteria can begin to appear just days after significant dietary changes. This doesn't mean that metabolism is completely transformed in a week, but it shows that the body responds much faster than we imagined. Another fascinating point is the communication between the gut and the brain. For a long time, it was believed that the brain controlled practically everything. Today we know that there's a real conversation happening all the time. It occurs through different pathways, through the vagus nerve, a kind of direct line between the gut and the brain, through hormones produced during digestion, through substances manufactured by the microbiota, and through molecules related to the immune system. This set became known as the gut-brain axis. It's one of the most active fields of current biomedical research. This doesn't mean that the microbiota alone determines our mood, behavior, or body weight, an idea that sometimes appears exaggerated on social media. But it does mean that it participates in this complex communication network. Another important concept is metabolic flexibility. Imagine a hybrid car capable of easily switching between different energy sources. A healthy organism does something similar. Depending on the situation, it efficiently uses carbohydrates, fats, or energy reserves. This adaptability is influenced by several factors: physical activity, sleep quality, diet, body composition, and possibly also the gut microbiota. When these systems function in an integrated way, the organism tends to respond better to environmental changes. But this adaptation can be impaired by habits repeated over many years. Diets very low in fiber, excess of ultra-processed foods, sedentary lifestyle, sleep deprivation, chronic stress, and frequent use of certain medications. All of this can alter this delicate balance. It is important to make a caveat. The gut microbiota is one of the most promising topics in modern science, but also one of the most complex. Many discoveries are still being investigated. Not every relationship observed in studies signifies cause and effect. Not every supplement that promises to balance the gut flora has robust evidence for all situations. Good science advances precisely because it distinguishes what we already know from what we are still trying to understand. And despite the questions that remain open, a conclusion is beginning to solidify. Human metabolism doesn't depend solely on the number of calories consumed. It results from the interaction between genes, hormones, brain, muscles, immune system, microbiota, and environment. It's a living system, dynamic, constantly adapting. But how have researchers managed to demonstrate all this in practice? What experiments have revealed that different people actually respond differently to the same foods? And what do these findings mean for those who want to improve their health or control their weight? That's exactly what science has begun to answer in recent years. For a long time, the gut microbiota was seen as a detail of digestion. Today, it occupies the center of one of the greatest revolutions in nutritional science. But this change didn't happen because someone formulated a new theory. It happened because experiments began to show something that seemed impossible. Different people responded in completely different ways to the same food. Imagine two volunteers receiving exactly the same breakfast, the same amount of bread, the same fruit, the same yogurt, the same calories. It would be natural to imagine that blood glucose would increase similarly in both. But when researchers began measuring these responses with continuous glucose sensors, they noticed something surprising. In some people, blood glucose rose only slightly. In others, it increased much more, even with the same meal, even under similar conditions. It was as if each organism interpreted that food in its own way. This discovery gave rise to a new question. What explains this difference? It was precisely to answer this question that one of the most influential projects in modern nutrition was born. Researchers began to follow thousands of people, analyzing diet, blood glucose, genetics, physical activity, sleep, and the composition of the gut microbiota. The goal was to discover why foods considered healthy produce such different responses among individuals. The results changed the way many scientists view nutrition. They showed that there is no single metabolic response valid for the entire population. The same banana, the same rice, the same bread. They can provoke different glycemic responses depending on a combination of individual factors. This does not mean that any food can be considered healthy or not simply based on one person's response. But it does mean that there is a much greater biological variability than we imagined. Another important discovery involved the diversity of the microbiota. Researchers observed that people with a more diverse gut community tend to have a better ability to produce beneficial substances derived from fiber fermentation. These metabolites help maintain the integrity of the intestinal wall, participate in communication with the immune system, and influence different aspects of metabolism. Once again, diet emerged as a key factor. The greater the variety of plant-based foods consumed regularly, the greater the diversity of nutrients available to feed different species of bacteria. This helps explain why dietary patterns rich in fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans, nuts, and whole grains are associated, in several studies, with better indicators of metabolic health. There is no single superfood responsible for this effect. It is diversity that seems to make the difference. At the same time, another line of research investigated a phenomenon known as metabolic adaptation. Imagine someone who loses a significant amount of weight. It would be expected that their energy expenditure would decrease simply because there is now less body mass to maintain. But some studies observed an even greater reduction than predicted. The body seemed to conserve energy more intensely. This adaptation can make maintaining weight loss difficult and helps explain why many people regain some of the weight lost after extremely restrictive diets. This doesn't mean that losing weight is impossible. It simply means that the body reacts to changes by trying to preserve balance, a mechanism that was extremely useful during human evolution when periods of scarcity were frequent. Another fascinating discovery came from the so-called gut-brain axis. Today we know that the gut produces hormones related to hunger and satiety, such as GLP-1 and PYY. and constantly communicates with the brain through the vagus nerve and various signaling molecules. This communication influences when we feel hungry, when we perceive satiety, and even some food choices. That's why eating doesn't depend solely on willpower. It's a process regulated by a complex network of biological signals. But it's important to separate solid evidence from exaggerations. In recent years, promises have emerged that simply taking a probiotic or reprogramming the microbiota would solve obesity, diabetes, or any metabolic problem. Science does not yet support these claims. Although there are promising results in specific areas, the microbiota remains a rapidly evolving field. Much remains to be discovered about which interventions work, for whom they work, and under what conditions. What we already know with considerable certainty is that consistent habits exert a far greater influence than quick fixes. A diet rich in fiber, a variety of vegetables, regular physical activity, adequate sleep, reduced consumption of ultra-processed foods. These factors are repeatedly associated with a more diverse microbiota and better metabolic indicators. Perhaps this is the greatest shift in perspective in modern science. For decades, we only asked how many calories are in this food. Today, we ask much deeper questions. How does this food influence my hormones? How does it affect my microbiota? How does it affect satiety? How does metabolism contribute to metabolic health over the years? Understanding this difference means understanding that metabolism doesn't work like a simple calculator. It functions as a living, intelligent, and adaptable system that continuously responds to the environment created by our choices. And this leads us to an inevitable question. If the body is so adaptable, why do so many people develop metabolic changes throughout their lives? The answer lies less in a single meal and much more in the habits we repeat daily. Can I move on to the next topic? When we think about metabolism, it's common to imagine something that happens only inside cells, as if it were a hidden mechanism, working silently without any influence from routine. But just observing a single day of modern life is enough to realize that metabolism receives constant stimuli, long before the first meal, long before the gym, long before any diet. It begins to respond the moment we wake up. Imagine two people. The first wakes up after 8 hours of sleep, has a leisurely breakfast, walks to work, and eats meals at relatively regular times. The second slept only 5 hours, left home late, skipped breakfast. She spent the entire day sitting, consumed mostly ultra-processed foods for her meals, and ended the night working late. Both consumed practically the same amount of calories. But did their bodies experience the same day? Most likely not. Because metabolism doesn't just respond to food, it responds to the context in which that food is consumed. Sleep is one of the first examples. A single night of poor sleep can alter hormones related to appetite, such as ghrelin and leptin, causing many people to feel hungrier and crave highly palatable foods the next day. Now imagine this scenario repeated for months. The effect ceases to be an isolated episode and becomes part of the body's routine. The same happens with stress. When we face situations of constant pressure, the body increases the release of cortisol. This hormone is fundamental for survival, but when it remains elevated for long periods, it can influence appetite, alter eating behavior, and make it difficult to maintain healthy habits. Not because the body is defective, but because it is responding to the environment. Another frequently ignored factor is a sedentary lifestyle. Many people associate physical activity only with calorie expenditure, but movement does much more than that. Muscles function as true metabolic organs. During contraction, they produce molecules called myokines, which participate in communication with the liver, adipose tissue, the immune system, and even the brain. Furthermore, maintaining a good amount of muscle mass contributes to more efficient glucose utilization and improves various aspects of metabolic health. That's why walking regularly, practicing strength training, or simply reducing sitting time can produce benefits that go far beyond the scale. There is another important player in this story: antibiotics. These medications have revolutionized medicine and saved millions of lives. When properly prescribed, they are indispensable. But their use can also temporarily alter the composition of the gut microbiota. In most people, part of this community recovers over time. Still, research investigates how repeated exposures, especially in the first years of life, can influence the development of this ecosystem. Again, the message is not to avoid necessary medications. It is to understand that the body continuously responds to lived experiences. Diet plays a similar role. A single meal rarely transforms the microbiota, but dietary patterns repeated over months and years can favor certain species of microorganisms at the expense of others. It's like tending a garden. If certain plants receive water, light, and nutrients regularly, they tend to grow. Others decline. Something similar happens with the microbiota. Foods rich in fiber feed specific groups of bacteria. Diets very poor in vegetables reduce this supply. The ecosystem is gradually remodeled. This process helps explain why sustainable changes tend to produce more consistent effects than radical transformations. Another important aspect is the so-called metabolic adaptation. Imagine someone who starts an extremely restrictive diet. In the first few days, weight loss may be rapid, but the body perceives that abrupt reduction in energy supply. In response, it tends to conserve fuel. Energy expenditure decreases. Hunger increases. The disposition for spontaneous activities may decrease. All this represents an attempt to conserve energy. It's an evolutionary mechanism. The body doesn't know there's a supermarket on the corner. It only interprets signals of abundance or scarcity. That's why very aggressive strategies often become difficult to maintain. Not because people are weak, but because the organism is doing exactly what it was programmed to do throughout evolution. Perhaps this is one of the biggest shifts in perspective in modern science. For a long time, it was believed that metabolism was synonymous with genetics, as if each person were born with a predetermined engine. Today, we know that genes influence metabolism, but they don't tell the whole story. Metabolism is dynamic. It changes. It adapts. It responds to the environment, to diet, to sleep, to physical activity, to stress, to body composition, to the microbiota. And this is perhaps the most encouraging news from all this research, because it means that although we cannot change our genetics, we can modify many of the factors that interact with it every day. There is no single meal capable of completely reprogramming the organism, but there is also no single habit responsible for all metabolic changes. What truly transforms the body is repetition. Hundreds of breakfasts, thousands of lunches, years of good night's sleep or bad night's sleep, months of movement or sedentary behavior. Metabolism learns from what we do repeatedly. And that's precisely the key to understanding how we can use this knowledge to our advantage. Because if the body is always learning, the question ceases to be how to change my metabolism and becomes what kind of environment am I teaching my body to recognize every day? This is the answer we will build in the next chapter. After learning about the experiments, understanding the role of the microbiota, and discovering that metabolism is constantly adapting, an inevitable question arises. If the body can be reprogrammed, how can we do it intelligently? The answer begins with a simple but profoundly transformative idea. You don't need to change everything today. In fact, the body responds better to changes it can maintain for a long time. Think of a forest. It doesn't appear overnight. Each tree grows slowly. The soil changes little by little. New species appear. Others disappear. Something similar happens with metabolism. It is the result of thousands of small adaptations accumulated over the years. That's precisely why small, consistent changes often produce more lasting effects than radical transformations. Feed your microbiota too. When we talk about healthy eating, we usually only think about the cells in our body. But there's another organism waiting for each meal: the trillions of microorganisms that live in the gut. The best way to care for them isn't to look for a miracle food, but to offer diversity. Research shows that people who consume a wide variety of plant-based foods tend to have a richer and more diverse microbiota. This means regularly including fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans, lentils, chickpeas, oats, seeds, nuts, whole grains. Each food provides different types of fiber and bioactive compounds. The greater the variety, the greater the chance of feeding different groups of beneficial bacteria. Fiber is perhaps one of the most underestimated nutrients. When we think about fiber, many people only remember its role in bowel function, but it does much more than that. Fiber serves as food for the microbiota. It helps in the production of short-chain fatty acids. It contributes to satiety. They participate in blood glucose control and promote slower digestion. Interestingly, a large part of the modern population consumes less fiber than recommended. Increasing this consumption is usually one of the most consistent strategies for improving diet quality. Don't look for perfect foods. There's a very common trap, believing that a single food will be able to cure the metabolism. Science hasn't found that food. Neither has kombucha, kefir, probiotic supplements, or any other isolated product. Some of these strategies may be useful in specific contexts, but none replaces a balanced diet. The body responds to the whole, not to a miracle ingredient. Keep your body moving. When we talk about physical exercise, many people only think about weight loss, but movement influences practically all the systems we've discussed so far. It improves insulin sensitivity, stimulates muscle mass, promotes blood glucose control, contributes to cardiovascular health, and seems to have positive effects on the microbiota as well. The good news is that you don't need to become an athlete. Walking, weight training, cycling, dancing, or any activity practiced regularly already represents enormous progress. The best exercise is still the one that fits into your routine. Protect your sleep. Sleeping well is not a luxury. It's a biological necessity. While we sleep, the body regulates hormones, consolidates memories, repairs tissues, and reorganizes various metabolic processes. When sleep is constantly interrupted or insufficient, the balance of these systems can also be affected. Therefore, improving your diet without taking care of your sleep is like trying to assemble a puzzle leaving several pieces out. Avoid wars against your own body. Extremely restrictive diets often promise quick results. In some cases, they do produce significant changes in the short term, but the body responds. Hunger increases, energy expenditure decreases. The risk of abandoning the plan grows. Therefore, more and more researchers are advocating sustainable strategies, changes that can be maintained for years, not just for a few weeks. Build a favorable environment. Perhaps this is the most powerful strategy. Don't rely exclusively on willpower. Organize your environment to facilitate good choices. Have fruits available. Keep minimally processed foods at home. Plan some of your meals. Reduce constant exposure to ultra-processed foods. The fewer difficult decisions you need to make daily, the greater the chance of maintaining new habits. The true reprogramming. Throughout this documentary, we use the word reprogram several times, but it deserves an important clarification. Metabolism doesn't change as if someone pressed a button. It changes like a trail in a forest. The more times we follow the same path, the more defined that trail becomes. Habits work the same way. A single walk doesn't transform your metabolism. A healthy meal doesn't either. But hundreds of them, repeated over months, teach the body a new pattern of functioning. And perhaps this is the most inspiring discovery of modern science. Your body is listening. Every day. With every meal. With every night's sleep. With every choice. It continuously learns from the environment you create. And this means that metabolism is not a sentence. It's a permanent conversation between your biology and your habits. When this investigation began, everything seemed to revolve around a simple question. How can two people consume practically the same amount of calories and yet have such different results? After going through this journey, the answer ceased to be simple, and at the same time, it became much more fascinating. We discovered that the human body doesn't work like a calculator. It works like a living system, a system that learns, that adapts, that continuously responds to the environment created by our choices. For a long time, we believed that counting calories was enough to understand metabolism. Today, we know that this is only part of the story. Hormones regulate appetite. Muscles influence how we use energy. The brain interprets hunger and satiety signals. The microbiota transforms fibers into molecules that participate in communication between different organs. Sleep reorganizes metabolic processes. Stress alters hormonal responses. All this happens at the same time. That's why two people can react differently to the same meal. Not because the laws of physics have ceased to exist, but because each organism carries a different biological history, built over years. Perhaps the greatest discovery of this research is precisely this. Metabolism is not an immutable destiny. It is always listening. Each meal sends information. Each night's sleep sends information. Each walk, each workout, each fiber-rich food, each prolonged period of stress communicates to the body what its environment is like, and the body responds, sometimes quickly, other times almost imperceptibly, but it responds. Before we conclude, it's worth summarizing the 5 major lessons of this journey. First, calories remain important, but they alone don't explain all the body's responses. Second, the gut microbiota participates in fundamental processes related to digestion, metabolism, the immune system, and communication with the brain. Third, no two organisms are exactly alike. Genetics, habits, sleep, physical activity, and microbiota help explain why different people respond differently to the same foods. Fourth, metabolism is adaptable. It changes throughout life in response to the environment created by repeated daily choices. And fifth, there is no miracle food capable of reprogramming the body overnight. What truly transforms health is consistency. This is perhaps the most important conclusion of this entire investigation. The body doesn't wait for perfect decisions. It responds to repetition. One balanced meal doesn't change everything, but thousands of them can. A single walk may seem insignificant, but years of movement profoundly transform the body. Sleeping well one night is important. Making it a habit is far more powerful. Modern science doesn't invite us to seek magical solutions. It invites us to understand that health is built little by little, like a forest that grows silently, like a trail that strengthens with each passage, like a constant conversation between what we do and how our body learns to respond. Perhaps that's exactly why the word reprogram makes so much sense. Not because there's a hidden button inside the body, but because each choice sends a new instruction. And these instructions, when repeated over time, help build a more efficient metabolism, a more balanced relationship with food, and more consistent health. If this documentary changed the way you see metabolism, tell us in the comments. Which discovery surprised you the most? Was it the role of the microbiota, metabolic adaptation, or the idea that two people can respond differently to the same meal? Your participation helps enrich the conversation and can inspire others to look at food with more curiosity and less guilt. If you believe this content can help someone better understand their own body, please share this video. Evidence-based information is one of the most powerful tools for transforming habits. And if you enjoy documentaries that combine science, history, and nutrition in an accessible way, please like and subscribe to the channel. In each episode, we investigate a different topic to show that the greatest health discoveries often begin with seemingly simple questions. In the next documentary, we will explore another fascinating frontier of nutritional science: intermittent fasting. Does it really activate special mechanisms in the body? What happens to metabolism during hours without eating? And what does the latest research reveal about its benefits, limitations, and risks? This is a story that promises to challenge many of the most popular ideas about nutrition. Thank you for following this investigation to the end. Until the next documentary.